Hello and welcome back to the Kindness Code. My name is Carmel Sawbury and I'm here with the wonderful Andy Baker. Andy is an absolute expert in the field of working with children, and he has got a podcast called Able to Care and also a wonderful book called Targeting the Positive with Behaviours That Challenge. And I'm thrilled to have him back on the podcast. And today we're going to talk about practical tools for parents and professionals, the 6-stage target model. That was a bit of a mouthful, Andy.
hmm Thank you very much. Thanks for having me again.
I love the way that this crosses over. So we actually kind of primarily talking about how we work with challenging children or children who've experienced any kind of trauma or need some therapeutic care. But you know what? It kind of goes for all of us, and it goes for parents as well, doesn't it?
Yeah. Children. How many times have you heard a parent say they don't come with a manual? Um, and parenting is one of the hardest things that we do. It's also one of the most thankless things we can do, as well as the most wonderful and thankful things we can do. So, yeah, any carer of children universally, whether biological, non-biological, is brave. Is the way I put it.
Because actually, we haven't touched on this because you've got some children of.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, my son is 25 years old, so he barely classes as a child anymore. Well, we've recently he's now moved on to pastures new, so he's not just the stinky flatmate anymore. But yeah, he came into my life when he was 4 years old, so he's been in my life for 21 years, and a wonderful man he has become. So I feel very privileged. And then my partner has two children, one 16, one 15, and they've been with her for 11 years. So that is the world that we are in.
Amazing. So you've been there, been through, and okay, don't come with manuals, but you've got a lot of professional experience and you've got your own personal experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things I often hear, that kids don't come with a manual, but actually there's loads of them. There's loads of manuals out there. And that's part of the
The
problem.
kids aren't that good at reading them, especially when they're babies.
Right, yeah.
Like that, yeah. Yeah,
um,
there's so much information, isn't there? And
there
actually,
is.
my kids, I've got twins who are 23, and I was a big on reading all the manuals, but a lot of the philosophies and the ideas around it have changed. And I think there's been a lot of more understanding, a lot more kinder care than kind of, remember the nanny and the naughty step.
Yeah, well, she's still going.
Let's
Yeah.
train children into behavior because we know that works, don't we?
Well, so a lot of her stuff comes from a principle called applied behavioral analysis, which is an area I've also studied in. And it's a bad rap because it's predominantly built on behaviorism. But it definitely, I think I've seen some stuff of her because I think she's got a new TV show, but I think it's in America, where it has softened significantly in her approaches, because I think they had to adapt. ABA got a really bad name because it was originally kind of created to stop autistic children being autistic. And it was all about conditioning through behaviorism to reduce things like stimming and stuff like that, enforcing eye contact and those sorts of things by doing reinforcement schedules and stuff. So it's so based in behaviorist models, which is why I find, but so society, you do something wrong, you go to prison. It's, that is, and this is where it's pervasive in some ways, as well as sometimes appropriate. I won't rule it out. It can work in certain elements. It can help. It can benefit. But if it's overused, and it's a kind of pop psychology kind of approach, going, "Oh, I understand behaviorism because I can do this." But if it isn't child centered, it isn't. And for many kids, it doesn't work if you haven't had them from the moment go, or there's been complications, or their brains work slightly differently, and things like that. And that's
I'm
where.
not sure that shaming works in many situations, though, Andy.
No, well, it can condition behavior. That doesn't mean it improves outcomes.
Mm.
Like putting somebody in a stock and throwing things at them used to stop people from stealing. It didn't necessarily mean that they became better people as a result of it. So it can create short-term results. Like if you think about the whole, shaming is still used society based, and it's pervasive in our narrative. How many times have you seen a video of maybe somebody acting out, and or somebody saying something, and you see the comments underneath going, "Name them and shame them,"
Yeah.
because that idea of actually shaming to reduce the chances, or it's just viewed as a punishment. Shaming is viewed as a punishment. It's not necessarily about correction. It's about retribution and justice. And human beings have an innate sense of justice. Like, we're not the only animals that do either. There's loads of animals that do exactly the same thing, where if they catch another animal cheating, so to speak, then they become quite vicious and quite violent towards that other animal. So we do have this innate sense of justice, and that there should be punishment for wrongdoing. There should be shaming for wrongdoing. And the problem is, I think probably shame is slightly worse than it ever has been, because when you take away people's tools, but you don't give them any others, they're usually the only ones that are left. So once upon a time, it would have been the belt, it would have been a slap, and it would have been done. But when you took that away and didn't give any other tools, parents are like, well, what am I supposed to use now? I tried grounding them, but they just leave, because now I'm not allowed to stop them from leaving. I tell them to take away their electronics, but they just get another one off their mate. And so it's all about, like, what can I take away, or what can. So it's all concepts of behaviorism, like like Super Nanny, based on the principles of OBA, which is either what we call a positive punishment or a negative punishment. And now, a positive punishment isn't good punishment. We're meaning positive in the, I provide a negative stimulus to reduce the chances of that behavior occurring. So like a smack is a positive punishment. It doesn't mean it's good. Telling a child off is a positive punishment. Negative punishment is removing something positive, a pleasant stimulus, to reduce the chances of that behavior occurring. So that's the case of, like, taking a break time off a kid, or taking electronics off a kid, or taking my attention away from a kid.
Mhm.
And that's what we class as a negative punishment, because I'm taking something positive away. And that comes from ABA principles. But as you said, it leads to shame. And the problem is that, or even just reduced quality of life. And reduced quality of life isn't synonymous with improving a person's mood and improving their self-esteem. And lowering an individual's self-esteem is not necessarily going to then improve their outcomes. But we can. It's like, I always sort of say, this is a very simplistic, overly simplistic example. I'd love a child to use good manners. Of course I would. It's nice to say please, it's nice to say thank you. But I can either get a child to use good manners because they're scared not to, or because I can teach them that actually it has significant benefits socially, and actually really, really help improve their outcomes as a person in the future.
And one of them has a far greater impact and positivity around it than that fear. Yeah.
But one's a quick, short, sharp solution, isn't it? Whereas the other one actually takes time and takes thought and emotional intelligence and stuff like that. A very simple analogy. I was dealing with somebody who commented in one of my posts that was quite negative to something I'd said. And I kind of, like, I recognized and validated his point, that I understand why it's frustrating that you feel like, kids are being allowed to do whatever they want to these days, but that isn't what I was saying in the slightest. I think boundaries are really important, but I can still be boundaried and kind at the same time. They're not separate, but people think they're completely opposite to each other. But the simple question is this: which of the two do you think has been more effective of reducing speeding offences? Fines and points, or speed awareness courses? And the fact is, speed awareness courses have been
I
shown to
thought
be more
it was
beneficial.
amazing. It really makes you think about the impact of 5 mile an hour more or less in, around different areas. Like, yeah, or I do watch out for the speed cameras, but yeah, that positive understanding why we do things rather than just fear of punishment is
Mhm.
is so much more powerful. And it's all about creating a better society. So if you've got children who behave means which I think used to mean they were just controlled. They followed the rules we made them follow, not necessarily saying, well, what is the kind and right thing to do to live a good life and give it a good life to other people as well, isn't it?
I think there's a weird narrative, isn't there? That we always sometimes look through rose-tinted glasses. Like, so, if it, that was fine because that's what happened to us, and therefore I turned out all right. And I often sort of say that, and I say it comically, and I don't mean to be so flippant with it, but, never did me any harm. My therapist told me, and it's a case of, so I may be a chronic people pleaser who struggles to maintain boundaries, or I overwork without properly looking after myself because I'm trying to prove that I'm good enough, or I'm an infinite perfectionist, or I'm so busy trying to make it absolutely perfect I get myself overwhelmed and stressed all the time. But yeah, the way I was parented was perfect, and it's it's a case. It's like,
just because the parenting wasn't quite right doesn't mean that you're gonna turn out a terrible person, but you might be doing terrible things to yourself or being unkind to yourself, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it doesn't mean like the way I raise my son is different from sometimes how I teach other people that they should be managing it because I've learned stuff. Like, and that's the thing is like the greatest managers aren't the ones who just do one course and then think they know it. They're the ones who continue their personal development and go, hey, the way I did it yesterday was one way, but maybe there's a better way. And actually letting go of ego and recognizing we know nothing, the Dunning-Kruger effect. You know, people who know a little think they're experts because they don't know how much they don't know. And a genuine expert usually is a person who goes, I know nothing. And I think that's where we can easily fall into that trap sometimes of because we've been parented or we've managed some behavior or some point, we then think, yeah, see, I know that now. I've mastered managing children. And then it only takes a kid with complexities to throw that in your face and realize, oh, this doesn't seem to be working. But the instinct is when we feel out of control or when we feel overwhelmed or slightly frightened or insecure, our instinct is to go into control mode. That's the way we keep ourselves safe. It's how we always have. It's, you know, when I feel scared, I
Sure,
jump.
when the saber-toothed tiger was chasing us, we
Yeah.
needed to make pretty good decisions straight away, didn't we?
Absolutely. You know, if it's freezing cold out there, I need to take control of the environment to build myself a shelter and to make myself a fire. So humans have this innate kind of desire for control, especially when we feel frightened. So when we're dealing with a child who seems dysregulated, who seems agitated, who doesn't seem to act in the way that we think he should, the instinct is so often, well, I must control that. But humans also are very good at resisting force. So if force is exerted on us, so like somebody's pulling a rope, then we pull back. If somebody's pushing us, we lean forwards. That's the instinct of our body and soul to kind of push against resistance. So when we've got a child who's dysregulated, we try and control. Their instinct isn't to just go with that control, it's to resist, which means then we up the ante and slowly increase and increase and increase the level of control, which again doesn't improve control. It makes you feel safe, but it doesn't make you happy because it causes disconnect. It means there's resentment, and there's suddenly we feel bad as a person. I mean, you know, I've spoken to many of my friends who know they've lost their temper with a child and then experience significant mum guilt afterwards because they knew they became emotionally dysregulated and they then controlled that child in that moment, but then the resentment that child feels towards them, the kind of disconnect that they have, it's really hard feeling.
Yeah, trying to control and then feel guilty about it, but that is when, as the adult, we're dysregulated and we aren't in control of situations. I mean, I think in say in the residential care space, people because they're paid to be there, they've got tag teams. They're not there on their own. They're
Yeah.
not exhausted. They've not got a new baby with sleepless nights. Well, some of them have, but they've got other people
And then they go to work.
and they can go home. And and so we've got that, but actually when you're exhausted and when a child has dysregulated and you've given them so much and you've done all this good work and then it hasn't worked the way you wanted it to, that's when I think it gets really, really difficult for people who work in care or parents who are just parents 24/7. So what are we go off on tangents, Andy. I love
Well,
this.
no, this leads us nicely. This is why frameworks help, right?
It's ridiculous. Model.
This is why, yeah, this is why tools and stuff are really helpful because you can either react or you can respond. And the difference between a reaction and response is one's rational and thought out and planned, and one's emotional. And an emotional reaction will tend to trigger an emotional reaction. Like if your friend's wandering around your new house looking at your new decoration with a glass of red wine in their hand and you think they're about to spill it and you go, look out, red wine's going to go everywhere. If you calmly walk over with a tray, you've got a better chance of saving your carpet. So it's exactly the same thing when we're managing other people, that how can they be calm if we're not calm ourselves? So learning certain strategies and tools to be able to respond rather than react is really important. And that's kind of where the six-stage target model, which is the main focus of the Targeting the Positive book, is both an analytical tool that can either be used by an organization or a setting to kind of proactively manage. So we kind of look at it as a journey to better understand the child and put things in place so we can respond rather than react. Or it can be used as a dynamic tool, where it's a case of in the moment, how do I respond to this situation? So the six stages go. We start off with identifying behavior, and we've spoken before about adaptive versus maladaptive, and we need to identify both. But sometimes we need to pick our battles. And if we're looking at it from a analytical point of view, it might be a case of, right, this kid's got all of these differences in the way that they manage their world and their emotions and behavior. Which are priorities? Like, because if we've got a child who dysregulates and becomes violent, them saying please and thank you might be an issue for another day. So we might prioritize with identifying the behaviors that actually matter. We then take those behaviors we find maladaptive, we prioritize them, and then we look to, okay, why this? Why now? What do we think might be the cause of this behavior or the purpose of this behavior? So the second stage is understanding and empathizing. And that's where we're going into why this, why now? And the three questions I get people to think about is, what are they feeling right now? What's wrong for them? Or what might have happened in the past that could be presenting in the present? And that's when we're bringing in kind of understanding an individual's past and things like that into the journey. And there's models around that. I mentioned it on another episode where we spoke about the human motivation triangle, for instance. Okay, that's a good way of exploring why this, why now. From the understanding empathizing, if we understand the why, then we can look to proactive plan. So if we understand, and the proactive plan is, okay, well, how can I either meet this need for them, reduce this stress, or what skills do they need to be able to learn so they can do it themselves? That's the idea. Whether it's to be cope with stress or to meet the need, they may need to learn new or better skills or give them new options. That's a proactive plan. But part of the proactive plan will also be, and what am I going to do if they still do it? So it also needs to be thinking about our response. And that should be this analytical kind of almost approaching it like a detective, a scientist, kind of like looking at, here's a problem. Here's what we think is a solution. From those first three, the identify behavior, understand and empathize, and then proactively plan, the next two are recognize escalation, which is where both we and they are in an actual incident, and then to respond appropriately. So I often say the first three are like a scientist, the next two are like a firefighter. And I refer to that again, that the aim is to put the fire out, not to stop the fire from happening or understand why. In that moment, we are responding. We shouldn't try and be proactive when we should be responding. What we can do is, after the incident's occurred, learn from the behavior, which is the last stage of the 6-stage target model, is learn from the incident. Okay, well, what worked, what didn't, what do we do differently? And it's both for the individual to reflect if we're doing it collaboratively, or it's for the staff to reflect, or the parents to reflect, to go, okay, what can we try? We now still, the identify I don't need to do again, but I'm now going into, did we get the reason right? Is there other reasons for this? Or proactive, we plan again, and we're going through this journey all the time with the individual. So that's how we use it kind of proactively.
I think the last stage learn actually, because
Yeah.
I think in a home situation, like in a sort of, if you're parenting, you're busy and there's lots going on. I think actually in residential care, there's all the Ofsted reports. There's so much to do. If there was a a proper incident, but actually it's really taking that time to sit back. It might be a day or two after the incident and go, what have we really learned? And actually sit back in a very rational way. And there might have been a little trigger that we've missed because actually it was quite a heightened situation and there's all the fallout and all the repair that you have to do and all the Ofsted. But I feel like the learn is something that, and that quite a forensic way of looking at it too, is maybe something that sometimes get missed, both in residential care and in a parenting situation.
Yeah, massively so. And it's one of there's a few things you mentioned there were important. Quite often incident reports don't get filled in until the child is at the top of the roller coaster or they're at 10. What doesn't always get reflected is, what did anybody do when they were at 9 and at 8 and at 7 and at 6 and at 5 and at 4 and at 3 and at 2 and at 1? And nothing occurs in a vacuum quite often. It may have been like we often refer to like the setting events, like there's things that shake up the bottle of Coke, and that one incident thing that blows a lid. But nobody noticed the first shake, the second shake, the third shake. But there's loads of opportunities that potentially got missed to stop that Coke from getting to that point of blowing, for that roller coaster to be set off in the first place, whatever analogy we're kind of using at that point, because that doesn't get reported. It doesn't get recorded, because it could have been yesterday and no incident occurred today. It isn't always 5 seconds before. It could be an accumulation that's been building, and it's just a straw that broke the camel's back. Again, another kind of analogy for the same thing. So they get missed, and they're really hard not to.
So the very best youth mentors are the ones with a spidey sense, that they're kind of head up, eyes open, ears open. And I think one of our team, sat on the sofa giving one of the children a cuddle and watching a movie for an hour when they had a ton of paperwork to do. But actually, they knew that just co-regulating, just being there was super important. I think that's the difference, isn't it? Because it's easy to get to work. Dinner's got to be cooked. You're organising an activity. What's going on the weekend? You've got to do the pay. But actually, and I think that's what makes working in care so hard, is that you've got to be really there and present and therapeutic as well, get your long list of stuff done.
Yeah. It's also because we neglect, we misunderstand expectations. So when we look at our expectations, we usually base it on a child's chronological age rather than their emotional age, for instance. And so there's often an assumption that a child should be able to recognize their emotions, because most children by the age of 4 or 5 are starting to pretty much know the basic emotions. When they're getting angry, when they're getting sad, they're able to maybe communicate it at that point, or they recognize it in themselves so they can start to choose self-regulation strategies. But the only reason they've learned it by that age is because it has been narrated and modeled and taught. It doesn't just occur out of the blue. So, and there can also be complications with that. So a lot of people don't understand that they think the only senses we have are the 5 that you got taught at school, which is everything you see, smell, feel, hear, and taste. But we also have an additional, well, there's 53 in one theory, but I won't go through those. That's a boring podcast. But if we just go into the ones that OTs mention, which is, we've then got vestibular, which is balance, proprioception, knowing where my arms and legs are, but interoception, which is knowing when I'm hungry, knowing when I'm thirsty, but also, how do I know when I'm angry? I feel it. How do I know when I'm excited? I feel it. How can I tell the difference between excited and nervous? Well, because I feel it and I can discriminate between those two different emotions slightly. If I have sensory processing issues, then I may have sensory processing issues in interoception as much as I might have in auditory, visual, etc. So it's much harder to control your emotions if you didn't know you were getting angry. So one of the things I get people doing talking the positive principle is, when we're saying, well, how do we stop them being aggressive? How do we help them to calm? Well, the first thing we do is do they know what calm is? Do they know what angry is? Do they recognize those emotions? Because if they don't, then that's like trying to get a child potty trained when the child doesn't know that they need the toilet. They're going to keep failing. So that means that you keep punishing them. If you started punishing them for messing the nappy, all you're going to do is just condition the child to be scared of you and potentially cause health problems. They're not going to immediately then start doing the thing you want them to do. So a good parent has to notice the jiggling, right? Just like in a Chinese potty training. You have to micromanage in the early stages to help and teach that child that's what feeling the toilet feels like, needing the toilet feels like. And I'm going to help you to make using the potty or using the toilet more rewarding than messing yourself in front of Paw Patrol. But I need to be there watching for those micro cues, watching for those little jiggles to help you. And as you said, it's the vigilance that staff need, especially in stabilization period when we're working through with a child. We can't just assume they should be able to manage their emotions by now. Does he even know when they're getting angry? Do they know the feelings of what anxiety is like? Because if we don't, we've got to watch for them, help them to recognize those cues that they show externally, to help them to recognize how that connects with their internal emotions, and then they can maybe start to be self-aware. If they can't be self-aware, they can't self-manage.
I love that analogy because it makes so much sense when we talk about the potty training and things. And also then these, especially kids who haven't had good behavior modeled, haven't said, "Oh, are you feeling sad? You're crying. It's okay. Mummy's going to give you a cuddle," and things. They often didn't get that kind. They weren't told what the emotion. I mean, how do we know what colour's red and what colour's blue? Because we got told,
Yeah,
isn't it? And it's
exactly.
probably very similar, isn't it?
Of course it is.
Really good understanding that when we're working with these kids who've had, traumatic upbringings often, that we have to be the parent that's seeing the jiggles, and whether the jiggles is anxiety or anger or hunger or sadness, and being really quite attuned to it, isn't it?
Mm.
And
Yeah,
then
and there's
helping.
loads of models. There's loads of models. Zones of regulation is one that some people have heard of,
Mm.
where it's like, you give them colors to give a concrete understanding of abstract emotions. I can't hold anger in my hand, And some kids really struggle with that. So by giving them a color, something concrete to hold on to, it helps them to actually better understand it in the more typical learning phases of a child.
So in a home, say we maybe thought that child might be feeling anxious or sad or angry or whatever's going on. As a youth mentor, do we just have to start co-regulating, saying and just asking, just being that whole curious, isn't it, to try and help them understand
Yeah.
what's
You mentioned it a moment ago, Carmel, which is what a typical parent will tend to do is what we call emotionally narrate. In the fact that we'll be like a child playing, we'll be narrating all sorts of things, going, "Oh, let's say I'm playing with some dinosaurs, for instance, and one of them runs away. Oh, that dinosaur's very scared, isn't he? He's running away." And we do that when we're playing with a child, which is why play is so important because we learn so much through play. As far as just whether it be role playing or oh, somebody's getting very cross. Who's a happy little boy? We constantly are narrating on emotions, helping make connections between emotions and behavior in the play. In the child themselves, in the way that they act out, and you're helping them to create this narrative, this understanding. As you say, how do I know what red is red? Well, how do I know what anger is? Well, somebody tells me. They see my cross face and they say angry, or they tell me they're angry and they have the cross face, which now means that I'm then narrating across. We're developing the mirror neurons. So if for any reason I've been significantly ignored, nobody's played with me, or the only expressions I've experienced are negative ones, then suddenly the way that my brain has developed, the wiring in the brain is going to be, well, how do I recognize good things if nobody's ever told me? How do I recognize when I'm happy if nobody's ever told me that's what happiness is? I did some work recently with exactly that, with a kid she said, I don't think I understand happy. I don't think I've ever been happy in my life. And I said, that's really sad, but let's look at some things. The other day, you came downstairs and you seemed really excited to tell me about that. I think in that moment you were happy, but it's excited, that's not happy. So she didn't understand that happiness was kind of this. In fact, I've got this here actually, which I sometimes use. So some of you may have seen the wheel of different emotions and stuff. So for younger kids, fear, disgust, happiness is kind of basic. But then what are they? Well, all the little emotions that come off that are different versions. And this is where even anger isn't one thing. I could be frustrated, irritated, overwhelmed, furious. There's a spectrum of different emotions within that one of anger. One of the first things you do when you're training as a therapist is increase your emotional vocabulary because it allows you to better empathize by being able to label potential emotions that your person you're counseling is experiencing.
I
Well,
guess with kids reading these books, parents spending more time on their phones as well, like I've spoken to earlier as teachers, and I said these kids, they're not even coming to school actually necessarily potty trained, let alone being
mm,
able to, narrate a whole range of emotions, and their vocabulary is getting smaller. So it's only making for all children even more difficult to articulate and understand what they're feeling.
yes.
Because you're right, angry is actually different to irritated, isn't it?
Yeah.
And different to furious. And if we just kind of go, we're just feeling angry, then it's not that helpful. That's a whole nother conversation. Okay.
But there's a
On
thing
the
called autonomy.
technology, but really, just loving the idea that the children that come through residential care have not had emotional narration often,
Often,
most of them, and then we're chucking a bit of neurodivergence and then the trauma. They don't know what these emotions genuinely feel like either, do they? And when they're maybe meant to be happy, they've got fear because they were living in a household that had underlying fear. So are they feeling happy or are they feeling scared? They probably don't know, do they?
yeah, that's that. Yeah. So there's a thing called the incredible 5-point scale, which gets kids and teachers exactly that. Because if the only emotion I have is anger, that kid steals my pencil, I get angry and I hit him. That kid bumps into me in the corridor, I get angry and I hit him. That kid looks at me funny, I get angry and I hit him. Because anger has one then behavior that can go with it. Whereas if suddenly, well, then that made you feel uncomfortable, that made you feel irritated, that made you feel frustrated. Maybe all of those could have slightly different actions that are associated with it. And maybe the only one that needs to be hitting is I feel in danger, or I feel like I feel furious, or I'm not advocating violence there. But just putting into context, if the kids don't realize there's a spectrum, then they're only going to have the one behavior that goes with the one emotion. So surely we need to educate them to realize that there is a spectrum of emotions.
But I think actually really good, obviously, we can't do the whole psychological behavior training with our children, and even with the youth mentors, have got a really busy job to do, and parents have got a busy job to do. But actually, just increasing the emotional narration and being looking for the jiggles, what's going on, and kind of being very, very aware and very present with our kids, either as parents or as mentors, and then helping them name those emotions. I think especially for residential care, is the understanding that most of these kids can't fully name their emotions, can they?
Yeah, I think that's or they don't experience them in the way that we think they should. Because if in early life my emotions meant danger, for most kids, emotions, even the bad ones, are good, right? If I cry because I'm in pain, something good happens. So from a very early stage, I'm learning that even my bad emotions are good emotions because it draws somebody towards me to help me to meet my needs. If, however, my emotions meant bad things, the good emotions get nothing and the bad emotions just get negativity or violence or seem to push people away from me. My whole concept of emotions is my emotions are dangerous, they hurt me. My emotions are dangerous, they push people away, or my emotions are dangerous, they hurt other people. So I'm never going to get an experience and be able to understand that there is a difference between good and bad emotions and things like that, because just emotions create anxiety. So that's why some kids can't cope with being happy, because it's still an overwhelm, it's still a danger, it's still anxiety based. Yeah.
Yeah, and so much. I mean, a child might have been happy when they were happy and excited. That's when they got a smack or a hit or something and told to sit down and be
Being
measured. I
silly,
think
yeah, I
that
was enjoying myself, and I was silly, so I got a smack. Yeah.
and understanding, when boys don't cry kind of thing. So that's a kind of an emotional reaction that a way that people related to that emotion. Hopefully that's changing a little bit. One of my sons used to be a bit of a crier. I used to cuddle him and go, "It's okay to feel sad." He's turned out to be a wonderful young man, but I'm sure in many other environments, boy, boys don't cry, and actually then that all gets squashed. We understand that, and if we kind of think to kids in care, lots of the emotions got negative
I think
responses.
that's yeah, it's really complicated. So I was a very sensitive kid. I cried a lot, but that meant I got bullied. That meant I got teased. That meant I got belittled, and not by parents, by anybody, like other kids and stuff like that. So there is this narrative that there is a narrative across the environment, but there was an element of that again makes sense. When we weren't top of the food chain, hunter gathering, if I was out hunting, and then I
Yeah.
stubbed my toe and just started crying, then the lion would have eaten me. So it's also a bit of a conditioned kind of thing that's happened for a very long time. So we're not just going to kind of go snap our fingers and change it, but it's very quick. So a lot of particularly men, not only men, but particularly men, will often shift emotional vulnerability into anger because it's safer to be angry than it is to be vulnerable. But I've seen this also with many traumatized individuals, both males and females, that crying is vulnerable. Crying doesn't make it better. Crying, if nobody's going to come and nurture you, crying is neither constructive or destructive. It's a state of nothingness. So actually, anger is a safer emotion to have because anger drives people away from you. Anger has some level of impact to it, and therefore it feels more in control. So it often feels safer to be angry than it does to be vulnerable.
And I guess if a child is crying in a home that's not supportive, they're just sitting in their sadness, and it's worse. With anger, at least, anger can as an
Can really?
expression is emotion, and it's a physical thing, which actually is, being physical when you're sad is or angry is quite a good thing to be, isn't it?
Yeah,
Just
absolutely. It's actually we do stuff with like I have a mindset coach and stuff, and we've spoken about this. That sometimes when you're low, the next best step up is anger because at least it's something. At least it's action.
it's the adrenaline that fires you up and it can kickstart you. We're not
Go, go,
advocating.
go down another whole route.
Um, Been fantastic again. Thank you, Andy. I think we did a stage target model. We flew through that. We talked about all sorts of different things. I could talk to you for ages, but I'm loving that little nuggets come out. And you know so much and got so much of the theory and the real uh, intellectual and education around it, but actually just these little bite-sized things that we kind of break down and going, "Ah, this is it." And it's making so I'm loving this journey, and Kid is making so much sense. And speaking to someone who've got all the academia behind it as well to just really help it land. So it's been absolutely fantastic. And if people want to hear more of your dulcet tones and wonderful advice, where can they hear you and read your lovely advice?
Thank you so much. Yeah, so they can come and listen to me on the Able to Care podcast. So that's on all podcast channels as well as YouTube. Lots of different episodes on there and covering lots of different topics and subjects, particularly around behavior, but we also then have people with lived experience. And then also my book is available from all good booksellers and probably some bad ones. And it's called Targeting the Positive with Behaviors That Challenge. It is really focused towards professionals rather than parents. But if you follow me, connect with me, there is parenting stuff coming.
And all the links will be in the show notes as well. Until next time, Andy, and we were to do 20-minute pods. This is 37, so it must have been a good convo. Well, I enjoyed it in the very least anyway, so thank you. And we shall see you again soon.